Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'll be giving us some time to let a few persons join in, but thank you everybody for who was early and on time. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to meet us here today for our second professional procurement webinar. I'd like to get a sense of where everybody's from. If everybody could drop like their flag or where they're calling in from right now. And so we can get just a general idea of who's in the audience, where's everybody from. I see Jamaica. See one from Jamaica. See two from Jamaica. So I guess Andrew, you brought a heavy Jamaican presence. We have three.
Absolutely. You know how we do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we have somebody from St. Lucia. We have somebody from St. Lucia.
Okay, perfect. More Jamaicans.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So we'll probably give everybody else about 3 minutes before we kick off and we pick Andre's brain. Just gives everybody a little bit of a chance to get into the meeting and then we'll begin so that we could be respectful of everybody's time. Just letting everybody know, I see we have more people joining in and in the waiting room. Just giving everybody some time to get into the waiting room and then we'll kick off. I did ask everybody who's on to let us know where they're calling in from. We have some Jamaicans and some St. Lucians in the chat. So everybody new that's joining in, feel free to drop your flag or where you're calling in from, and we'll be beginning shortly. Okay, let's kick things off. So, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in with us. I see we have 47 people in the chat, a bit more than what we expected. There will be a few polls going up while we're having this discussion. Please, everyone, take some time to go through the polls. And firstly, we just want to know how you're feeling today. How's everything going with the Christmas? And I hope everybody's having a good day. So, again, thank you for joining in with us. We're joined by Mr. Andrei Bennett. We'll be going through navigating the challenges within public procurement. I'm Keegan Patrick, the co-founder and co-CEO of Rifbid, and I'm just here to guide the conversation as we pick Mr. Bennett's brain. He's a respected expert in public procurement policy. He's successfully led initiatives in procurement and has an extensive background within the industry. So I'd like to let him give a little bit of some background into his career, a little bit about what he does, and what's his vision for the future within the procurement industry.
Thanks, Keegan, and good afternoon, everyone. It's definitely my pleasure to be here. So, just a little bit about me. I have been involved with procurement in Jamaica since 2012. And the funny thing is that this was not a deliberate attempt. This was sort of someone seeing some potential in me for something other than what I was doing at the time, which was working in a lab doing chemistry and moving into public procurement. I eventually got the opportunity to become in charge of Jamaica's procurement policy unit here at the Ministry of Finance, a job I've been doing since 2019. I've also been contributing to discussions about public procurement reform in the region, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana and so on. And so I'm happy to share some insights about Jamaica's public procurement system, some of the things that we're happy about, and some of the things that we think we could improve.
Cool. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us. That's a great introduction. So I'll kick things off into some of the questions that I have that was burning to us that we thought would be really interesting to the group of public procurement agents we have, officials, persons interested in winning government contracts as well. I think we have a few suppliers in the chat as well. So my first question is around what are the significant changes you've observed in procurement regulations recently? I know you're the chief of public procurement policy. I wanted to know what's the new things that you see happening within the industry, especially in Jamaica.
Yeah, all right. So I guess one of the critical things that I see a trend towards these days, and it's a good thing, it's the sort of proper definition of the goals that public procurement can achieve. The objectives are usually set out in the legal framework. So if you look in procurement legislation across the region, in Jamaica's, in Trinidad, in Barbados, etc., in some of the earlier provisions, shortly after the interpretation section, you will find a set of goals, a set of objectives that are supposed to be pursued. Now, what has happened over the years is that we've sort of just written things into legislation without fully understanding what all of them really mean and how they're meant to be operationalized. It's quite a catastrophe. And so one of the conversations I hear happening and I'm happy about is a more thoughtful definition of what these goals actually are. I noticed, for example, you know that United Kingdom recently formulated its own public procurement law because prior to Brexit, the United Kingdom was a part of the EU directives, or they used the EU directives on public procurement. And now in their legislation, they have been very clear about what public procurement is meant to achieve for them. And it's these five things. It's to deliver value for money, maximize public benefit, which, by the way, we don't know what that means, but we'll get to it. Sharing information for the purpose of allowing suppliers and others to understand the procuring entities, procurement policies and decisions, and to act and be seen to act with integrity. Four things, really.
Yeah.
Simple things. These are the things that public procurement architecture is meant to achieve. And in doing this sort of very pared down approach and in focusing on the things that actually matter, it helps to articulate procedures and policies that will enable us to get there. And those are the things that will ultimately engender trust in government and its institutions. So that's one of the key trends that I see.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
also seeing, yeah, you wanted to.
no, no, that's interesting. That's interesting. One of the things I wanted to pick your brain about, you mentioned increasing that value for money, and that being one of the main things you try to achieve within public procurement. Have you seen there like certain calculations, or how do you go about defining that this activity that we've gotten, we call it the maximum value for money within this process?
Yeah, so there are a few academics that have attempted to explore the possibility of confining value for money to some kind of quantitative approach, which I
Mhm.
suspect has some value. It has some utility. Ultimately, these are economic arguments, you know. Value for money is really something that describes a level of economic efficiency. It is about the way that you think that you have identified the utility maximizing supplier and that you do not sustain value leakage or value loss during the implementation of the contract. So
Yeah,
there are ways in which you could confine that to economic terms and you can write a formula for it. I've come across those things. But there is really still a philosophical struggle with understanding what value is. Some people define value for money to include externalities such as sustainable development and the need to increase local community development and using the procurement policy to achieve a range of horizontal or procurement link goals. And they put all of that into the idea of value. Uh, that I think is problematic. I think there's a place to think about that, but
yeah,
value is really it's an economic argument. Whether or not we would find a formula that gets us there, I doubt. That a formula alone could do it. Maybe a formula together with some qualitative
qualitative.
information. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So so I know you're the chief public procurement policy officer. I've assumed that you've had some hand to play in some of the procurement policy within Jamaica. Are there any strategies you've seen from the agencies or the ministries that are trying to follow the policies made by your team to ensure compliance without slowing down the procurement processes? We want to be able to procure goods and services as fast as we can to continue improving economic development, but we also want to ensure that we're compliant with the laws and policies set by the governing body. Have you seen any strategies to help us move fast while still being compliant?
That's an interesting question, Keegan. I didn't actually think about this from the procuring entities standpoint.
Yeah,
But I can talk about how we have sort of understood the problem from the policy
yeah,
arm
definitely.
and what we have been what we've been doing. So if we're talking about strategies, we're talking about long-term plans. We're not talking purely about tactics, right? So we're talking about overall big picture. And so on that point, we have been clear on the following. The first thing as a strategy is that this tension between regulatory compliance and transactional efficiency is one that has been forming the basis of wide criticism in Jamaica. If you just Google broadly Jamaica public procurement, you will find persons at different levels, the policymakers themselves and the man on the street complaining about how long things take. So one of the things that we did very early, just after COVID, or it just at the tail end, was that we decided, the only way we can sort of fix this problem is to recognize the complexity of public procurement. So, Keegan, I want to be clear to anybody that's listening that public procurement is a complex undertaking. It's complex for many reasons that time won't allow us to go into. But we cannot simply try to move the needle on one issue without truly understanding how it affects the rest of the system.
Yeah,
And so you have to be thoughtful. Thoughtfulness as a strategy is important. So what we did to sort of understand what's going on with transactional latency was we commissioned a big study of all the time efficiency issues right across the public sector. right? So we did surveys, we got people into a room, did focus groups, we understand the problem, right? And so as a strategy, I'd recommend that you have to first sort of understand what the real issues are. And then having done that now, what we did was last year, December, we formulated some benchmarks. And we're saying, okay, having done this longitudinal study, here's how long we think these parts of the transaction should take. And this is all about business management, right? I told you that public procurement is complex, and a part of it involves thinking through business operations. And so we're saying we're benchmarking particular components of the processes, and we're saying this is how long we expect you to take, and we've put tools in to measure how long it's taken, and then to also address some of the more systemic issues.
That's
Another
really
thing,
interesting.
okay, yeah, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
just want to say, I just going to chime in and say that's really interesting. One of the things I may want to ask for everybody that's on the call that's within the either a procurement officer within another country or different agency, is that some of information that you could share later on, being the average times that you got for different procurement processes and some of that information you gathered from those surveys and focus groups? Is that something you'd be able to share?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll have a discussion with others about it. Yeah, I'm very
No, but
open. I like sharing stuff, but
yeah.
there are all sorts of issues sometimes with sharing information. But yeah, I'm happy to share it. I'm happy to share it. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we're able to get that, we'll share with persons on the call, and hopefully it's beneficial to helping them improve their public procurement processes within their individual islands or ministries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're happy to show you the process by which we formulated these benchmarks and how we go about measuring them. And then, one of the things that our former finance minister, who you might be aware is now working with the IMF as a deputy managing director, he was very keen on rewards and recognition. And so later on, we'll get to talking about data and how we use data. And so he said to us, recently, guys, now that you've got all this data and you know how people are performing, recognize the entities that are doing well and give them incentives to continue doing well. Very important to recognize when these benchmarks are met or surpassed so that we can identify the good actions in the system.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one thing. The second thing is recognizing, so we're talking about strategies for sort of easing that tension between regulatory compliance and transactional efficiency. The next thing
Yeah.
is to just be really, really critical about the legal framework itself. And, you know, so I'm an attorney, and what we do generally is we try to formulate laws that are very, very risk averse, and we try to ensure that we manage for risk very carefully. But there are times when we overdo it. And so that's one of the tensions, that's one of the issues you find with a lot of procurement legislation in our region and in Jamaica. Now, the provenance of a lot of legislation, is really to deal with corruption issues. It's in its orientation, it is constraining. It is meant to ensure that public financial management is constrained. The problem with that is there are inherent difficulties between constrained public financial management and great economic decision making, which is what public procurement demands. So it's really sophisticated transactional activity. It is not about following rules. So one of the things that we have done recently is dispassionately to look at our law and to say, what are we actually trying to achieve here? Do we actually need this? Very, very critically thoughtful and analytical about the several components of the law, not to diminish controls, but to find that proper balance between the controls that are necessary to enable public procurement. So those are two things that I want to share with those who are here. And I know in the region, based on my perusal of legislation, that this is a serious problem in terms
Yeah.
of procurement legislation that in its orientation is meant to constrain rather than enable.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess one of the things I wanted to further pick your brain on that topic was from legislature and policy point of view, is there any structures in place for ensuring that when we're evaluating supplier proposals who we're picking to deliver the service, that they're reviewed objectively and transparently to the public? I know there's always the stigma amongst the public, in the public procurement sector, that persons feel like, hey, I was not fairly judged, or this person was always going to win the contract no matter what.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because if you are really transparent and again thoughtful about the criteria and the metrics that you incorporate in each of these procurement proceedings, then that sentiment should be easily dispelled. No, I guess there are ways in which we need to sort of unravel what we're trying to do when we're creating criteria for supplier selection. All right, there are two main questions that we're looking at answering. One is about the bidder. So, what are the antecedents of this bidder? And there are two, again, sub issues to consider. One is, does the bidder possess any trait that will give the government concern that if it contracts with this bidder, then the government itself is exposed to reputational risk? The government cannot be going about awarding contracts to persons that are involved with the trafficking of minors or anybody for that matter, or with persons that include non-fair trade labor in their supply chain. The government cannot be operating in a way that awards contracts to organized criminals or to terrorists. And so obviously there are lots of checks on antecedents of bidders in that sense. And then in the second sense, there are checks on traits that the bidder possesses that will enable the bidder to deliver the value that's promised in the bid. You see? So you have to check if the bidder has the right tools and equipment and management structures. Does the bidder have the right professional capacity? Is the bidder's technical experience sufficient to allow the bidder to seamlessly implement the procurement contract? Those are the sort of main ideas in check one. And then in check two, you're looking at the value that's actually promised in the bid. And again, those are capable of very objective formulation. And so it is for me a big issue when I see persons not properly formulating these criteria, because that's where it starts. If you're going to communicate properly to suppliers as to the basis on which you will select a supplier, then you've got to formulate these criteria very, very carefully. And there's sort of three things that I wanted to, leave with those who are listening. The first thing is, don't throw the kitchen sink of criteria into bidding documents. Maybe Keegan, you have seen bidding documents in your time that have come from procuring entities, and when you look at the list of requirements, the list is long from here to Mars.
Yeah.
And you wonder, okay, what on earth is going on? Really be critical, adopt a very critical disposition in setting the criteria. And then the second thing is ensuring that the criteria that you set, the ones that you have the discretion to set, are actually effective in managing implementation risk. So one of the things that I see, and this is an example, in contracts for public works, right? So you need
Mhm.
to find a supplier to build a roadway. One of the questions that most procuring entities, sorry, ask is, how many years have you been in the business of building roads? Right? Which on the surface seems to be a reasonable question. But how do you objectively determine the number of years that the bidder is in business in doing that particular thing that gives you confidence that the bidder can actually execute the contract? That's the real question. A better question to ask, and I've been telling persons, is, well, give me a list of contracts that you have successfully implemented. Show me the contracts that have come in on time and within budget. And the higher the number of those, for example, that you can submit, is the higher we rate you, because it suggests that you will be able to replicate that. And that probably comes from good management structures and good quality management systems in your own organization. You
Mhm.
follow?
Yeah.
Ask better questions. I tell people all the time, and persons who have heard me before probably have heard this analogy. So I've been an attorney for many, many years. But if you have the misfortune of being caught by the police doing something wrong one night, don't call me. because even though I've been an attorney for many years, I don't have any experience with criminal defense. And so I wouldn't know the first thing to tell the police to get you. You probably will get locked up and spend the rest of your life in prison. But if you ask me, how many years have you been an attorney? I will tell you above 10, more than 10. And you say, oh, you've been an attorney for more than 10 years, so you must know what you're doing. No, ask better questions. So don't just ask for a bunch of things. Ask for things that will actually help. And then you might say, well, Andre, there are times when we just don't know how to do this. And I know we're going to segue into this in a bit, but well, ask AI. Bring up a chat GPT window, or get Claude AI or Copilot and say, hey, here's a project I am working on and I'm doing the procurement, and these are the criteria or the circumstances. Throw me some criteria that I can use to help to evaluate the suppliers, and then thoughtfully evaluate what the AI gives you. So there are ways to get around that problem. The real issue, though, is ensuring that the criteria that you set are clear, that they are capable of objective determination, and that they make sense in the circumstances. Asking for a bunch of things that are unnecessary will not get you to good procurement.
Yeah, I think one thing that I want to double down on now, I thought was also really interesting is I know the government of Jamaica, I don't know how recently they have implemented their own e-government procurement system. And I wanted to know, how do you see that technology system helping in managing the procurement process, as well as giving you that information about how many procurement contracts have gone on time, how many of them have been within budget. How did, if you guys developed that tool internally, or whether you're contracted it out and got a supplier to build that system, how do you believe technology has helped in managing the process and ensuring that we have this fair, transparent procurement process?
Yeah, that's a weighty question, Keegan. Weighty question. Well, yeah, we did actually outsource the development of our system. In fact, our system is a well-known system that's used from a Greek company called European Dynamics. Several other countries use this system, and in fact, it is the same system that forms the Caribbean Community Notice Board that
Okay.
is meant to support the regional integration of our procurement markets.
Okay.
Well, how does e-procurement work, and how does it help with all of this in many, many ways? I think one of the cheap ways is that it really does increase transaction seamlessness. And so the efficiency that you can imagine from not having to spend time compiling and using manual systems is, well, certainly what you the benefit of being able to avoid printing things and binding them, and that benefit is almost immeasurable, but it's instant and it's experiential. A procurement officer can sit anywhere in the world and compose a new competition, and a supplier can be anywhere in the world and respond to the competition. Yeah, it's seamless. And what happens is that, of course, the bids are received and they're encrypted so that they're extremely secure. Receive them in a secure way so that nobody can access them. And that increases confidence, or ought to increase confidence in the suppliers. um, so the seamlessness, the efficiency of execution, and those are really, really important. And then the possibility, which is what we're most happy about, of sort of big data, lots and lots of transactional points to help us to understand. And it was sort of implied in your question, what's going on in the system and what are the trends? What can we convert from this data into actionable insights? And then how can we build on those insights? So we've been looking at data, unfortunately, and this is for the Jamaicans that are on, we have not achieved the level of success that we hoped in terms of getting our contracts closed out in the e-procurement system. So right now we have a mandate to use the system, but most persons are only using the system partially. So we're now strategizing to ensure that you have to complete the system. You have to complete every single transaction in the system. And that helps to give us data that we can then analyze for the purpose of improving public procurement overall. So we can tell you now about a range of issues from the data that we've collected. We can identify the time it takes to get stuff done. We can identify persons that are undertaking procurement in less than efficient ways. We can tell we can tell you people who might be splintering contract awards. We can tell people who are been doing well, who maybe are awarding frameworks and doing their call offs in the system, who have really taken a strategic look at the system from a sort of policy perspective. We have been able to identify what our bottleneck items are, what our leverage items are, what our riskier items are, submitting to porters forces and doing CRALIC investigations on our data. We understand what's going on. So I think that's the sort of major transforming effect. It's the kind of system that we have now. It really does enable transactional seamlessness. It increases confidence because of the security. And then we get all of this data that we have been using to help with understanding the system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know how involved you were with the process, but I know we have procurement officers and managers from across the region, and also some from outside of the Caribbean region. Some may not have a digital platform for the e-procurement system yet. Is there any best practices or strategies that, if you were involved in the process, that you might also be able to share in them soliciting or looking to either build their own in-house or looking for somebody to
Mm.
build a e-procurement system for them?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't involved in the process of acquiring our system, but I have participated in discussions with persons who have been on that journey to acquiring their own system. In fact, we've had a couple of study tours to Jamaica to sort of look at what we have, yeah, from other countries in the Caribbean.
You're
From
leading the way.
say again?
I say you guys are leading the way.
Oh well, yeah, we've had the longest. Yeah, we've had our e-procurement system. We've even had a delegation from an African state come over to look at what we've been doing. A country that is similarly sized to us, and they were thinking about their new procurement project. I guess I don't know too much about technology procurement, but I would say that one of the chief things to do would be to sit down and really articulate. Keegan, I'm advancing thoughtfulness in all of the things that I'm saying,
Yeah,
because so much of what we do in public procurement seems to be a patchwork of ideas from all over the world, which are not really properly thought through. And so I'm saying, when you're acquiring your system, sit down and think about what you want your system to do, recognizing that the possibilities are limitless, right? Endless number of possibilities. You've got unique challenges in your own organizations and in your own countries, and those challenges can be facilitated, or solving those challenges can be facilitated by thinking through how these systems could work. And then once you've done that, you could probably look in the market to see if there's any system that already does what you've got to do. If you can't find a system that aligns on those particular goals, then perhaps you need to commission bespoke development. That's the best I can say. But the first
yeah.
thing is to think about what you want. Right. I know there are lots of great tools out there, Rifbid, for example, and and others that are emerging that incorporate AI. Just 2 weeks ago, a professor from a university here reached out and said, "Hey, we want to think about how we can incorporate AI into your public procurement." When this Rifbid webinar went out, when the advertisements, I got um, comments from connections on LinkedIn from other persons that have developed tools, and they're saying, "Hey, we've got these tools." So lots of tools available. And I would say, really think through what those tools have to offer, and then make a decision about how you would go about acquiring it. But I don't know too much about tech and IT,
Yeah.
but I would just say that thoughtfulness about your goals is important.
Yeah, I think that's really solid advice. From our standpoint and how we look at it is always from a problem first mindset, really going deep. I like when you said when you're thinking about your procurement policy and strategies, you went to do surveys, you spoke to people, and you found out what were the problems on the ground, and then built the policy around that. And in a very similar way, I think that's exactly how we go about building product and how we think about how can we help improve a particular industry, and our particular industry ends up being public procurement and helping you manage the procurement process faster, as well as incorporating new tools like AI to give us more of those insights and recommendations into how can we continually improve this process.
Yeah.
I do want to segue the conversation into another segment that I had in terms of supplier relationship management. And so as we go about, um, in public procurement, we would start working with a number of suppliers on a repeated basis. Maybe the suppliers won X number of contracts, they're well known. How do we maintain this supplier relationship? Or are there also these types of contracts where um, maybe I'm always buying 50 units of pencils from the supplier? Is it that I need to create a new bidding document every time I need 50 pencils from the supplier? Or do I put out one contract to say, hey, I need somebody to supply me 50 pencils for the next 5 years, 3 times a year, and I'm fine from a policy or legal standpoint? Or is there, at what opportunity is there for like a new player that's manufacturing pencils to come in and also supply it to the government? So how do we manage that supplier relationship from a policy standpoint, that you think?
Yeah. Those questions are critical. It's going to take me a
Yeah.
little bit, a little while to
I know, I
sort of
know.
unravel all of it, and I hope that I would be able to respond to each of the components. But okay, one of the things that we have to be very clear on, Keegan, is that, and I said it at the beginning, public procurement is primarily economic activity. At the core of what we do is an economic market, and in territories like ours that are underpinned by liberal economic policy, where what we expect is government creates a framework that allows businesses to be established and then supports these businesses, well, in some sort of way, and then enables business now to sort of drive the economy to employ people, and then we tax them. Right? And what's meant to happen is that the more efficient suppliers are supposed to become bigger and bigger, and least efficient suppliers are supposed to eventually fold and no longer be available until somebody comes with a better idea and that knocks out that. Okay, so that's the sort, at the core of the markets that we engage are suppliers. And unfortunately, one of the things that we tend not to do is we tend to underestimate the importance of the forces that keep those markets alive. We don't understand things from the supplier's perspective. And so, if we're going to truly build relationships, we've got to step out of our shoes as buyer for a little bit, step into the shoe of the supplier, understanding the constraints that they have, the risks that they face, and then to find ways in which we can align. All right. So one of the problems is, for example, in Jamaica, it's what I call cancel culture. Uh, because of our hyper focus on compliance, very often what happens is when a supplier does not sort of fully respond to the solicitation, right? So the supplier may have missed a minor or insignificant requirement, right? Now, our law allows privilege for the procuring entity to overlook that immaterial, as long as it's immaterial, right? But what a lot of procuring entities tend to do is that instead of overlooking it and still giving the supplier a chance, what they do is they cancel the entire procurement and then they go invite new bids again. And sometimes you find them doing this 4 and 5 times. And that's a real problem because, first of all, it takes a lot of work for bids to be submitted. People don't understand just how much work it takes to respond to an RFP. and it takes a lot of money. Right? It is costly. So when you continuously invite bids for the same project, you institute supply apathy, and that diminishes the relationship from the beginning. The second thing is that what also tends to happen in terms of the way that we view suppliers is that we think that it's them over there and us over here as buyers, right?
Yeah,
And in some ways that's true, because suppliers benefit from information asymmetry. They know the markets way more than we do. Okay, they have their hands on innovation. They have their hands on what's actually taking place and what's affecting the supply of certain things, and they are actually going to most likely exploit that information asymmetry to increase their profits.
yeah,
What we have to do is to find ways, and this sort of goes to the question that you asked about the strategies around supplying the pens. We need to find ways to ensure that, notwithstanding the information asymmetry and notwithstanding the motivations that suppliers have, that we leverage and that we extract from them the most value that we can. So to your question, well, how about, depending on the number of suppliers that are in the market, establishing a framework agreement for the supply of these pens? First of all, we shouldn't even be in our small territories. We shouldn't even be in a situation, and this is my opinion, where individual procuring entities are buying commonly used goods and services across government. We need to transition our model to be similar to the United Kingdom, for example, where we have a central purchasing body that is established to place contracts for commonly used items, consumables, pens, copy paper, etc. Right? From a national perspective. And then when we now need a call down, that we have this sort of very sensible catalog or an easy, efficient way to just go grab those things. Predetermined terms, prices are already set. You can just go get those things. You understand what I'm saying?
yeah.
We need to get there. Jamaica is actually working on a pilot for that right now as we speak. And that's important because it will transition or model of supply engagement and help to build relationships much better. I hope I'm not meandering. Anyway,
No, no,
the,
no.
the, the third point that I'd want to make is that the relationship between the procuring entity and the supplier is a contractual one. It's not a fraternal relationship. Yes, we are friends and we are colleagues in the sense that we are professional colleagues, but we are not in a brotherhood. What underpins our relationship is a contract. And we both parties have to understand what the contract says and to ensure that the contract is administered efficiently. One of the big issues that disrupt supply relationships, and I'm talking from the Jamaican perspective now, is that Jamaican buyers don't pay suppliers on time, which is the core contractual obligation. You see? And that spirals into a whole range of very negative things. And so, what we have to do if we're going to really truly improve the relationship is to recognize the importance of the contract that underpins it and that we administer it faithfully. Once both parties are clear on the contract and what the terms require, then we should have overall good relationships. Many more things to say, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think you've been giving us so much good insight. I want to ask one more question before I open it up and I see we have 100 and people, 20 people in the chat. I'm sure they have a lot more questions than me. I think the last question. So we've been on the supplier side. We've also talked to many procurement agents. I wanted to get your insights on how do you guys manage supplier queries and complaints. A lot of suppliers that we've spoken to on our end always say it's pointless, like trying to reach out to a public procurement entity to voice your concerns because you just never get a response. So I wanted to know how do you guys manage it, or how have what has been some of your feedback on supplier queries and complaints?
Yeah, that's interesting because we've now institutionalized a whole complaint mechanism, and we've put a significant. There isn't only a good legal framework. There's also an institutional approach. So we have a whole body called the Procurement Review Board,
Mhm.
right, which is a quasi judicial tribunal that's meant to determine when an aggrieved supplier alleges that there was a non-compliant action, right, then he can have, or it can have recourse all the way up to the board, and the board can order restitution and can even intervene in the contract and so on. Okay, so generally speaking, what our legal framework provides is that for contracts, once a successful bidder is identified, there's a standstill period, a period of up to 10 days where no decision is taken, no action is taken to formulate the contract. Okay? And that standstill period is meant to now be the time when suppliers can write to procuring entities to ask for debrief or to indeed to challenge the procuring entity's decision. Okay? Now, that's been happening quite a lot in Jamaica. So I'm surprised that persons are sort of concerned that there is no mechanism. Uh, so how it's meant to work is that you feel offended by the decision, you write to the procuring entity alleging the non-compliance and the loss. So if you look in section 48 of our act, you'll see that. And the procuring entity actually has a certain number of days to consider your request for reconsideration and to tell you whether they are going to reconsider it and what steps are going to be taken regarding the procurement, or whether it's wholly without merit and therefore it's to be thrown out. If you're not happy with that, then you can go to the procurement review board. And the truth is that we need to strengthen our legislation in Jamaica, because one of the issues that you find in our law is that it says when the procuring entity has said that your bid is rejected, that is to say that the bid is non-responsive, you actually don't have recourse to the reconsideration and review process. So imagine that the procuring entity has made an error in determining that your bid is to be rejected. Once they have said that the bid is rejected, then the law says you can't actually go seek reconsideration. And so we've had a few, maybe in my 5 years, I've seen maybe about 5 requests for reconsideration. Sorry, 5 requests for review at the procurement review board, but all of them have been in circumstances where the procuring entity has said your bid has been rejected, and so the review board does not have jurisdiction to consider that.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So there's that mechanism for complaints, and people also write to us outside of the reconsideration and review appeals mechanism. Suppliers write to us from time to time here at the office, and they say, hey, this is what has happened, and we will intervene in a very limited way when we identify that maybe the policy compliance is going off, and that has actually worked to relieve the distress of some suppliers.
Okay, very interesting. I do want to open up the floor to anybody else who has additional questions. So if you could raise your hand and mute, we'll try to do this as orderly as we can. Whoever has any burning questions for Mr. Bennett, would love to hear your questions. Okay, I would have to unmute anybody that wants to ask a question. So if you could type in the chat that you would like to ask a question, I'll unmute you and you could go ahead and speak. So I'll just wait for any messages in the chat and we'll go in a sequential fashion. Okay, Paul East. Paul, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, morning.
Morning.
Hello, good morning.
Okay, yeah, you're hearing me. Wonderful, thanks. Just need some clarification as it relates to the standstill period. We noted sometime maybe about 2-3 months ago, an article in the paper indicating an intent, a decision to desist the use, stop the use of standstill periods. What's happening with that?
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to be clear. All right, so Here's the issue, Paul. Currently, standstill is meant to apply to every single contract of every value. So even a contract for $1,000 is meant to be subject to standstill. And that's problematic in a system that's already extremely burdensome and laden with bureaucratic issues. So the intention is not at all to remove standstill, but to have it apply only above to contracts only above a certain threshold. And that threshold will still be protective of smaller players, but it will allow the really, really small contracts to go through seamlessly. So there's no intention to diminish the protections that are included in the law in relation to supplier challenge.
A follow-up, if you don't mind.
Please.
Go ahead.
Yes, I am noting that I can't quote the section just now, but I think it's in the regulation that indicate that standstill periods are applicable to contracts above the tier 1 threshold.
Right. So let me just interject. If you read that section alone, that's the impression you will get. But you've got to read the Amendment Act as well. So what the Amendment Act did was it repealed that section so that now standstill is applicable to every single contract. All right. So the 2018 Amendment Act did exactly what I just said. The original act was meant to apply it only to tier 1 and above, or to above tier 1. But then the Amendment Act changed that, so now it applies to every single thing.
Thank you very much. I didn't get to that part.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, okay, Alpha, you could go ahead with your question. You'll be able to unmute.
Okay, unmute today. I was juggling devices. And thanks again for hosting such an intriguing session, Keegan and Rifbid. And thanks for obliging, Andre. Some insightful information gleaned there. I was just curious, besides saying thanks, really curious to hear how forward thinking you are with the insight you shared. And with agencies like Rifbid or organizations like ourselves, A1 Engineering and Global Project Management Services, coming up with, call it tech tools, AI supplementing these tools to help agencies. We do it in the US in the so-called first world context. We're trying to help our small island developing states and as well as the multilateral financiers. And a lot of times I have to give that disclaimer that we're not trying to create human parity, right? We're not trying to take away the decision-making control from the authorities or the legislations or legislators, I should say, or frankly, the politicians. How do you see things unfolding in terms of that world and getting past that hurdle of the reluctance to use these tools that could help build consensus and align criteria even before the solicitation is put out to the street, so we know we have a better evaluation process down the line?
Yeah, so Arthur, I am 100% aligned on the fact that the machines are here. They're here, and they're here to make our lives easier. They're here to improve the the seamlessness in which we can make decisions.
Indeed.
And I am a big advocate. One of the things that formed my platform here at the ministry when I got here was to say to my team, okay, we've got e-procurement, hooray. What's next? And so we've articulated a whole program with the help of some consultants and through US government funding that's meant to carry our procurement system into the next dimension. And I mean, we take inspiration from places like Costa Rica and Mexico that have been experimenting with blockchain in their public procurement architecture, using smart self-executing contracts to increase contract administration. We are inspired by that. We are looking at AI and how AI can help to evaluate bids, so that once we structure the information in a certain way and the bidders write the bids in a certain way, then we see the possibility of AI tools reading the bids and assigning scores based on the rubric. That would make life so much easier and would increase the efficiency with which we can make contract award decisions. Of course, the final decision will be for a human being,
Right.
but we're actually actively pursuing those ideas now. We're looking to see how we can get our next level of development funded for the inclusion of those tools. But we at the ministry, well, in the policy office here, we are keen on ensuring that we tap into innovation that's existing to increase the quality of decisions that we make in public procurement.
Thanks for sharing that, man. That's reassuring to hear that you're on that track. And all I can say is keep striving, brother. Because, like you said, the machines, so to speak, are ahead. They ain't going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere. Yes. Thanks, Arthur.
All right. Thanks, Keegan.
Okay, we have Kason. Kason, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Hey, Andre.
Hi,
And
Kason.
Keegan. Yes, it's good to be here. The discussions have been surrounded with I noticed you mentioned you're decreasing the aspects of bidder apathy. And there's certain aspects of it that we cannot control or even maintain in some ways, because there's always some element to this. Because you pointed earlier, you were referring to standstill period. We recently encountered a situation where we had a standstill period. However, a bidder who we were working with over a period of time did not make the cut, and they were somehow feeling spurned for some reason. But that's all of this is more directed to the question of how do we get the bidders to the state of the stakeholder awareness aspect of it, for them to understand that process of, we're not trying to get you out or to cut you out or to not make you benefit in some way or the other, but for some reason you didn't follow the standard, you didn't follow the guidelines set out, and for some reason you didn't make it. But then how do we do that without getting to that place of that bitter apathy? And also, because even though the said bidder that we would have dealt with, they even require the standstill period would have passed, and they're now requiring us to still have a sit down with them and talk to them. We don't want to, we know that it is not within our remit to do so, but we don't really want to kind of leave them out there, kind of having to wonder what.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I guess maybe I'd in the time we have remaining, I'll try to see how quickly I can give you 3 things that came to mind. First of all, I don't know if I agree that you can't talk to the bidder now. Talk to the bidder. I mean, the bidder has asked you to explain the basis on which they have not been selected. That empowers the bidder. So once you've got a clear set of reasons that you can show the bidder you missed this criterion and this is why the criterion is important, then the bidder for the next occasion will be empowered by that. So still talk to the bidder, still help the bidder to understand how the bid went awry. And then the second thing is, part of the problem is the way that we formulate sometimes the requirements, using the most obnoxious language, really not using language that is helpful to anybody. It doesn't help people to understand what we're asking, and sometimes it's all over the place. If you I have the privilege of reviewing hundreds of bidding documents per year, right, Kason? And I have seen examples of extremely poor drafting, extremely poor drafting. And you wonder how bidders actually respond to this, because there's just no way to understand the requirements of the entity. And then I guess the third point is something that we have to do here. We need to work on the simplicity of those tender templates. And we have your back. You've been hearing for a while now that we've reviewed them, and we're waiting on the right occasion to sort of release them. Some of those tender templates that are used in public procurement right across the world are just pure nonsense. If you look, for example, in New Zealand, I find them to have a really, really good approach. So you can just go New Zealand procurement, and their idea of getting to the point. Guys, this is what we want. This is what we don't want. This is why we want it. Give me your bid. That's the sense. Yeah, our templates have, we're going to lock you up if you do these 20
Yeah.
things,
A lot
and
of love.
you're a
Yeah.
criminal, and
Mhm.
we don't
Mhm.
like you, and you know we have to ensure that you understand that we're doing business with government's money, and we can't take goods from this country or that country, and we're going to do these procedures and those procedures. It
Mhm.
just is too much,
Yeah.
and the poor tenderers just get lost in the weeds. So we're working on simplifying those templates, but definitely still debrief that supply case and help them to understand where they fell short.
All right. Thanks, Andre.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this point in time, I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who came out and joined us with this discussion with Mr. Bennett. I'd also like to thank Andre for giving us all of his insights and his wealth of knowledge in public procurement. We're at time, so I'll wrap things up. My name again, Keegan Patrick. If you didn't know, at Rifbid, we've probably spoken or interacted with over 400 public procurement officers and suppliers, and we've built an AI-powered e-procurement platform connecting government officials, procurement agencies, and suppliers. We have tools for suppliers, helping them in finding government contracts across the world, across the Caribbean, across the United States. And we have an AI assistant to help them with preparing their bids. On procurement, for procurement officers, we've also built an e-procurement solution to help with drafting those bidding documents, evaluating suppliers, doing forecasting, as well as we have some AI evaluator tools to help with that evaluation process. So if anybody's interested, whether you're a supplier or a procurement officer, feel free to reach out to us at info@rifbid.com or check out our website, rifbid.com. Happy to speak with anybody, and we're always happy to do demonstrations of the platform and how we could help with accelerating the future of government procurement. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to be in touch with everybody. And thank you again, Andre, for taking the time out. And I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Keegan. My pleasure.
And just want to add, everyone, thanks again for coming. Also look out for feedback form that will be sent out to all participants. Thanks again, Andre. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Bye.